What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 40. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Solo show today. Before I get into the news, just want to remind people to subscribe to the Conflicts of Interest show feeds. If you're still listening, paying the old foreign policy focus ones, if you could switch over, I would appreciate that. And then if you're already on the Conflicts of Interest one, share the show. Find it on YouTube. There's a channel with the video versions, but you can also find the show at the Libertarian Institute where it's hosted. And I'm the news editor. And you can also find the daily news roundup that I write there. And with that, let's get into this first story I have talking about qualified immunity. Of course, this is the legal doctrine that lets government agents get away with crimes that other people wouldn't be able to. And so, unless there's like a particular instance that something is like directly punishable, so like I guess you can't like murder your wife or something like that, but if you get scared and shoot somebody and murder somebody when you're a cop, then you're probably going to get qualified immunity where, I as a regular person can't, go walk into some guy's house and then if he scares me, I can't shoot him in the face. But that's what happens. This is a case where some cops get qualified immunity and some don't. And so we'll get into that. The article I have to break it down was at Reason magazine, and it's titled "Cops Who Beat and Killed an Innocent Man Are Not Entitled to Qualified Immunity. Appeals Court Rules, but the Cops Who Watched Are." And this is by Bill Binion. So the ruling kind of, I guess, distinguishes that there were two officers that beat this man, Kendole Joseph, and we'll get into the details of the murder in a second here, but they beat him to death, and so they were actually not entitled to qualified immunity, these two officers. They tased him several times, they beat him, kicking him, hitting him with the baton, and since he obviously didn't present a threat and everything like this, the court ruled that these cops didn't have the right to do that and can face I believe a civil suit. I'm not sure what all legal punishments that they're facing. This did happen in 2017. And then there were 9 other officers who were on the scene, watched this murder happen, didn't do anything. They are entitled to qualified immunity, which I guess we shouldn't be surprised about, even in cases of school shootings like the Parkland school shooting. Those officers were you don't have to go defend the kids. That's not actually a legal mandate, even if you're like the cop in position to do that. Now, so here is the actual narrative. It was on February 7th, 2017, that an assistant principal at a middle school called the police, or reported to a police officer that there was a guy acting strangely in front of the school. And look, if you're the principal of a school, somebody acting strangely outside the school, this is probably, something that you would want to alert some kind of security personnel to, and to let them know, hey, and maybe can't ask this guy to leave. He could, potentially seem strange or dangerous to the kids, and you don't want that. And just in case it is somebody who's either going to act violently or irrationally, or even in this case where the man, it turns out to have mental illness and be schizophrenic. I mean, people who are schizophrenic could say some pretty crazy and deranged things, and it's not all appropriate for children. And so I guess the officers were notified. They went, they saw the guy, and they chased him away. The guy's yelling, "Help me, they're gonna kill me," running away. And he ran into the store. When the cops confronted him in the store, he jumped over the counter. The cops followed, jumping over the counter, and that's when the beating began. I'm not sure, like, they say there's 9 other officers that were given qualified immunity. Some of these guys may have come in after this guy was already, pretty much bludgeoned to death. But you would assume that at least some of the officers witnessed this excessive beating. I guess as the guy is dying, he's saying, "Somebody help me! Somebody call the cops! They're trying to kill me. These aren't the real cops." And so, it's very sad to see that this happen to this, man who literally was just suffering from a mental illness and was beaten to death for it by a couple of rogue and brutal cops. This is one of the things I talk about, when I was talking about the puppy side a couple episodes ago with, when cops could get away with killing puppies and you start killing puppies, then it's really easy to kill other living things, I imagine. And maybe this is one of those, really dark examples where you have the cops, get used to killing and get a taste for it and take advantage when they have a chance. I mean, I'm sure the guy who is schizophrenic here, Kendole Joseph, didn't seem to mean any harm to anyone. He didn't have any weapons. From how his behavior is described, I spent a few years working with people who had schizophrenia. It seemed fairly typical, of what those people live with and, what their symptoms are and what they have to deal with. And, plenty of people walk around and taught them to themselves and act strangely. And like I said, I completely understand why, the principal of the school felt uncomfortable with him. But, he ran away from the school. So once that happened, there's no real reason to continue to interfere with him. And yet these cops pursued him and then beat him to death. And so it is unbelievably, disturbing that the police are able to do this. And I mean, two of these officers will apparently get away with it, but obviously there were 9 other police officers on the scene who witnessed a crime happen, against an innocent unarmed man who, never seemed to act aggressively, or, police needed to do this to him. He was just, scared. And who knows what the voices and, are the hallucinations that he was having, those kind of schizophrenic symptoms that he was suffering from, were telling him about those police officers. And so, maybe he would feel is able to like go and talk to some, the store owner and be like, hey, the police are, store owner could like assure the guy that the police are okay, that they're not gonna, they end up killing him. But there's ways to handle this situation where the guy doesn't end up dead. And you have 2 murdering police officers. I really hope that these guys are off the streets and put into jail for life, although I'm not sure it will happen. I will also lock up the other 9 cops too, because if you're all gonna just stand there and watch some guy get beaten to death in a horrible way, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't a case where somebody took one punch and went down and, it was just a big jacked up cop and a, skinny, really unhealthy schizophrenic. I mean, like, you could imagine that situation. This is a case where the cops got up close and personal and just bludgeoned this guy to death, and other cops watched it happen. So that's policing in the U.S. All right, before I get into the story on the Iranian nuclear scientist who was assassinated, just want to take a quick second to thank the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. One of the things you could do to support the show and support a great company is get your CBD products at palomaverdestore.com. If you're not familiar with CBD, it could help you with a range of issues, taking the edge off, making, the anxiety a little bit more calm, especially, in this year where you're told that if you go to Thanksgiving dinner, you might kill grandma, or spend too much time inside, not getting enough exercise, got a little extra pain, that kind of thing. CBD could really help you with. At palomaverdestore.com, there's a whole page dedicated to informing you about CBD and what it could do for you. And so you get your products there. You use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, for 25% off at checkout. And again, it helps the show and it helps Carlos and his company, Paloma Verde. Great guy, libertarian, the kind of guy you want to support. Let's get back to the show. All right, so we have this story here written up by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, titled Israel Suspected in Assassination of Top Iranian Scientist. I'm going to try to pronounce this guy's name once, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, and he was a head or top Iranian nuclear scientist, and they claimed it was the military branch of this. And so the people who were claim that Iran is making a nuclear weapon, when I don't think that's the case, and the evidence has shown that that's not the case. They would say that this guy is trying to build a nuclear bomb, or at least in the past was a part of that program. This isn't the first Iranian nuclear scientist to have been assassinated. It happened several times. I think 4 times between like 2002 and 2012. And most of those times, those attacks were attributed to Israel, although it's not, they don't come right out and say it, of course, but definitely hint that they were behind it. That said, it doesn't necessarily mean for sure that is this was Israel. There's certainly dissident groups in Iran that that Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, has worked with the MEK, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, which is a group of Iranian dissidents. They have ties to members of the U.S. deep state like Rudy Giuliani. They pay U.S. warmongers thousands and thousands of dollars to come speak at their events to buy influence in the U.S. And they also have branches and operations within Iran. And again, those they have been weaponized against the Iranian state in the past by foreign intelligence agencies like Mossad. I'm not saying that that's what happened here. It doesn't seem like all the details are out yet. If you look at the pictures, it appears this guy was driving in some kind of Nissan sedan, I guess an Altima by the size of it, and somebody pulled up and fired several shots. And it was initially claimed to be a suicide attack, but if you look at like the destruction from the pictures, it at least doesn't seem like a suicide bombing. Now maybe that means that like the assassin just stayed there and fired more and more rounds into the the dead scientist, and it made no plans to escape. His plan was to get shot to death or something like that. But it doesn't seem like it was an explosion. Now, the reasons this are dangerous is because for Iran, this is attacking their nuclear program, which right now, according to the international UN watchdog for nuclear weapons, that's the IAEA, says that Iran isn't working on a nuclear program. So this guy isn't making nuclear weapons for Iran and is working somewhere within their civilian nuclear program. And so, assassinating this scientist is obviously a really big violation of Iranian sovereignty, as well as likely some state-sanctioned murder in the streets. And the Iranian government will feel a need to respond to this somehow. I'm not sure exactly how that response will come and when. For the Iranians, you have this kind of interesting dilemma where, in one sense, things could get better after January 20th. You'll have the Biden administration back. In the recent past, you've worked with the Democratic Party in the United States, the last president, Barack Obama, to get the nuclear deal done. And so it could be a signal that the Saudis and the Israelis will be reined in a little bit, and tensions with the Iranians will decrease. They could try to work to getting back in the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. But at the same time, it could just be more of the same. And they, I'm guessing would make the calculation. I'm not sure I exactly agree with it, but they would, I think, make the calculation that if we don't respond, then, it'll be seen as a sign that they could just do this again and continue to, attack us. Also a sign of a weakness in the regime. I mean, imagine if, an Iranian assassin came to the United States and killed somebody working on the F-35 or the new ICBM, the Boeing B-21 bomber, any of these projects. I think people would be horrified and outraged, especially if this is a guy that was, a scientist and not no way like, a former soldier or something like that. Or, if maybe at one, he works for Boeing, but was designing 737s and not the B-21. then that I think could be even more offensive to the civilian population. I'm sure that's how the Iranian people kind of see this more as a, civilian assassination. So, it'll be detrimental to U.S. and Iranian relations. Again, I guess the hope is that the Iranians calculate here that the best course of action is to, kind of hold and see what happens with the Biden administration. And I'm not necessarily convinced that Biden is going to have a better Iran policy than Trump, even though there's reasons on the face of it to suspect that he will, including, his support for the JCPOA during the Obama administration. He was the vice president. He was supportive of that deal. It seems like, he'll want to get back into it. His warmongering Secretary of State nominee, Antony Blinken, even I believe, wants to get back in it. And so there's reasons to think it could happen. But at the same time, there's even high ranking members of the Democrat Party. I mentioned Bob Menendez and Chris Coons, who have said, it's not good enough for the, Iranians just to get back into it. They have to make these other concessions. Well, I think they're going to be a hell of a lot less likely to want to make concessions if they have at least what they believe foreign influence carrying out these attacks in their country. And I hope to just make sure that I have qualified everything I said here, and it's just alleged that the Israelis are behind it. And I mean, the Al Qaeda, the jihadists, ISIS, they all are opposed to Iran and hate the Ayatollahs too. And so while I don't necessarily think there's any reason to believe they're behind it other than their hatred for the Iranian state, it's possible that there's jihadist groups or something else behind this attack, and it's not necessarily the Israelis, although by the reaction to it, it seems like they're happy to at least for people to believe they were behind it. Now, this attack produced some interesting tweets. I think the most interesting by the former CIA director, torturer, drone program, mass murderer, overall just extremely ugly human being, John O'Brennan. This is at John Brennan on Twitter. This is a war criminal act and highly reckless. It risks lethal retaliation and a new round of regional conflict. Iranian leaders would be wise to wait for the return of responsible American leadership on the global stage and resist the urge to respond against perceived culprits. And he's retweeting here the Associated Press story. So, I mean, he's even seeming to suggest here that if the U.S. wasn't behind this attack, that they were certainly in the position to greenlight it or, passively let it happen, essentially greenlight it. And so obviously this is one of the few times that I'm going to agree with what John Brennan said. I just said in my analysis before that hopefully the Iranians would decide to wait for the American government of Joe Biden, which will hopefully be better on the Iranian issue. Where I have a problem with John Brennan's statement is just the hypocrisy, and there's so much packed into this. It's actually going to take me a few minutes to get through. The first, and I think the most obvious level of hypocrisy here, is that John Brennan pushed the Logan attack on Michael Flynn, the General Michael Flynn, who was alleged to be in violation of the Logan Act. The Logan Act is this unconstitutional law that's been on the U.S. books for years and years. Glenn Greenwald on his Substack, his latest article is on this, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's about, I think it's titled something like what Representative Ilhan Omar doesn't understand or misunderstands about John Brennan and the Logan Act. And, he goes into all the details in there if you're interested in a deep dive on the Logan Act, but it says and it's unconstitutional. And he compares it to the Espionage Act in this way, where it limits American free speech by saying that Americans aren't allowed to advocate for a foreign policy, or interact or offer a foreign government anything that's against the government or something like that. And so it was alleged that Michael Flynn violated the Logan Act by having a conversation with the Russian ambassador while he was Trump's designate to be the national security advisor. Basically, he's saying to the Russians that, hey, we, understand that the Obama administration is expelling a lot of your ambassadors and putting all these sanctions on, but there's going to be a new administration coming in about a month. Now, this, I believe, was after Trump even was, the designate by the Electoral College. This is late December, and says, hey, like, don't overreact because you have a new administration coming in. Things could be different. Now, Trump ends up being really aggressive against Russia, but that was what was put forth by Michael Flynn at the time. And John Brennan was one of these main guys targeting Flynn, going after him, including for the Logan Act. And now for him to put out this statement is, just the hypocrisy is so obvious. Now, in both cases, you have people who I think are war criminals, John Brennan and Michael Flynn. Both of them should be locked up in jail forever, but not for, making this statement. Now, I think Michael Flynn's was far more powerful because, he was actually in a position. John Brennan is just some idiot on Twitter now who has a fancy contract from MSNBC and a check mark next to his name. But other than that, he's really just, a mass murderer, behind Obama's drone program and the Timber Sycamore program to arm Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. Terrible, terrible person. But on this, he's not wrong to advocate that kind of position. He's also not wrong that this is a war crime. And if it turns out that it was Israel, the United States, Saudi Arabia acting, in coordination or with the U.S. green light, then yeah, you can't go and kill civilians in other countries with targeted attacks because, they're working on the civilian nuclear program. And he's right to point out it, it's some kind of Iranian retaliation that, could be like rocket attacks on Iraqi bases housing U.S. forces that ends up with a U.S. soldier being killed. Like, nails it all in there. But the problem, with, John Brennan pointing this out is this is exactly what he did in the Obama administration, where he identified people in foreign countries to be killed by drone strikes. Now, my guess is that Brennan's going to be like, oh, these people were a threat. I'm sure the Israelis or the Saudis or the Trump administration would claim that this guy is a threat. That doesn't make it true. And even if it was true, the ultimate problem is you can't just hand out death sentence, with legal memos. You have to actually make an accusation and take it to court or something like that if you want to do it, or get some kind of authorization from Congress. You can't just hand out airstrikes. They had this thing called Terror Tuesday in the Obama administration. They meet every Tuesday, go through a list of names, decide who would get to live another week and who would die. And as I've been saying, these are war crimes. You can't do this. You can't just decide that these people should die. In the same way, with this assassination, should the accusations be true? And John Brennan puts out another tweet defending this, saying that it's somehow different, and it's absolutely not. This guy, it just loves to kill people, but only the people that he wants to kill. He'll complain if other people kill people that he doesn't want to die, and just I don't know, the ultimate hypocrisy. And I hate John Brennan, so thought that was an interesting thing to go through and talk about here. Now, next story I have here is on Afghanistan. Again, this one by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The U.S. has closed at least 10 bases in Afghanistan since signing the peace deal. So it's not often that I have good news stories on the show, and I thought this would be an opportunity to have one. It says here that U.S. and Afghan officials told the Washington Post that the U.S. has closed at least 10 bases in Afghanistan since signing the peace deal with the Taliban in February. The closures are part of the drawdown The U.S. is expected to bring the numbers down to 2,500 by January 15th. Some of the officials said the U.S. is making decisions about whether certain military equipment will be turned over to the Afghan government or sent back to the U.S. despite drawdowns. One official said the U.S. will still be able to carry out airstrikes against the Taliban and ISIS. This is one of the things that even if the U.S. withdraws our forces from Afghanistan, I mean, we fly in planes from anywhere, mid-air refueling. There's B-52s now in the mid East. There's a massive base in the Indian Ocean at Diego Garcia. The aircraft carrier, the USS Nimitz, is about to do another mission in the Persian Gulf. We have massive bases in Bahrain, the one that holds the fifth fleet, and Djibouti. There's thousands of U.S. soldiers, and of course in Kuwait, and then the Al Udeid base in Qatar. And so there's so many military assets in the region that if the U.S. need to carry out some kind of attack against the Taliban or the Islamic State or Al Qaeda or whatever person they perceive as being a threat in Afghanistan, they could absolutely do that. Not to mention a lot of our submarines and destroyers have guided missiles on them, and so it's not even that we need to fly a plane overhead. We could launch one of these medium range submarine launched Tomahawk missiles and hit whatever we want. So there's plenty of options to kill people in Afghanistan if that's what we want to do. We don't need U.S. soldiers on the ground to do that. And it seems that the U.S. is making some progress, like closing these bases are real steps towards actually getting U.S. troops out of there. There was a pretty good article. I forget who wrote it. But I think Mark Perry wrote this article, and I think it's at the National Interest, saying that Trump's troop drawdown kind of ends up right in the wheelhouse of what Joe Biden wants to do, which is to keep a small, not small, because 2,500 troops isn't that small. That's still a lot of American lives in jeopardy, but around 2,500 American troops in Afghanistan. I guess until eternity, just in case there's ever some kind of threat there, somebody that we could perceive as a threat in Afghanistan. So we have troops on the ground to call in the airstrike to blow those people up. I suppose that's what Joe Biden wants. The problem with this, of course, is that the Taliban want the U.S. to leave, and there's a deal saying that all foreign troops are supposed to leave Afghanistan. I believe it's by May 2021, and so if the Biden administration keeps those 2,500 troops there, that that's going to violate the deal, and it could lead to an uptick of fighting by the Taliban. And even if that's initially targeting the Afghan government, I think the U.S. will get involved to halt the Taliban advances, and that could put a lot of U.S. lives in jeopardy doing things in that way. And this is a very dangerous tactic, but I think, kind of like Mark Perry points out in that article, the way that Trump Afghan policy is now going to blend into the Biden one, I think it's going to be very much what Biden wants. Along with U.S. troops leaving Afghanistan, there are also now some German troops leaving, including they are now closing their base in Kunduz. They have, I think, 1,000 troops at that base, a total of 1,200 in Afghanistan. I have this article here from Reuters that I'm getting this information from. And, again, if anybody's watching the YouTube, then you actually get to see all the articles that I'm reading from here. So, the U.S., I think, has 2,500 or will have 2,500 by mid-January. I'm not sure what the total number of international troops is, and then also probably gets complicated because there's a lot of special forces in the country, but I think it's another like 2,000 to 2,500. So, I mean, it's potential that, we're down to under 5,000 international troops, and of course there's a lot of contractors and, again, special forces, intelligence officers carrying out different operations and stuff like that may make the number actually quite a bit higher than it seems with that. But that that is a metric that's easily or kind of easily measured, the troop levels versus the contractor levels and stuff like that. And let's hope that Germany is planning on withdrawing all those troops and going along with the U.S. Afghan peace deal. There was interesting confrontation. I believe this was in the East Japan Sea, or uh, I'm sure different countries have different names for it. But the title of the article here, again from Reuters: Russia chases off U.S. warship and row over waters in Sea of Japan. I believe this is north of Japan. It also may be called the East Korean Sea or something like that. There's the body of water off of the Korean Peninsula. Uh, Russia and Japan, and I'm sure other countries, have different claims, and the U.S. carried out, I guess, like a right to navigation operation here, and a Russian destroyer. Sent out warnings to the U.S. destroyer, which was actually the USS John McCain, which is a guided missile destroyer for the U.S. as well. And according to the Russian side of the story, it was pushed out of the water, and according to the U.S. side of the story, it completed its mission and left. My guess is that there's a little bit of truth in both accounts. And but this is now another place where the US is picking to be confrontational with Russia or China over these territorial water issues. And I mean, I'm not sure what the idea is here, that the US Navy is supposed to enforce the territorial water claims of all of our allies everywhere on the globe, whether it's with Ukraine in the Sea of Azov in the Black Sea, to the South China Sea, to the Sea of Japan. Now all over the world we had to carry out these freedom of navigation and other kinds of missions that are really military show of force operations, to say that we could sail our warships through where we want Russia, and there's nothing you could do about it. So that this continues to go on, continues to be provocative against Japan. We ran a good article by um, Joanna Ross, or Johanna Ross. I believe she's from Scotland. At antiwar.com over the weekend on this, saying how at the same time you have this, you also have Joe Biden announcing his foreign policy team and saying, stop worrying, U.S. allies, we're going to get re-engaged with the world. I know that the Trump administration, we haven't been doing enough, even though we've deployed more troops to Eastern Europe and sanctioned Russia more, and got out of the INF treaty and challenged China's claims to the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and all these other places. Biden's message to us, even though that's what's happened during the Trump administration, is, hey, don't worry, we're going to be back involved in the world, and we're getting back into it. And so it's just hard to imagine what Joe Biden must be thinking happened these past 4 years, if what he's worried about is that the U.S. became disengaged from the world when we, deployed so many more troops and built so much more militarily. I guess, in a sense that, diplomacy was broken down a little bit. But when you talked to, and when you heard from Joe Biden on the campaign trail, other than maybe getting back in the Iranian nuclear deal, most of what he's talking about is calling Kim Jong-un a thug, and Donald Trump was too close to Vladimir Putin, two leaders that he needs to work with diplomatically, not engage militarily, which seems like what his foreign policy is actually going to end up being. All right, last story before we wrap up here. This one from CNN. Acting Defense Secretary makes first ever visit to Somalia amid reports of major troop cuts. U.S. has 700 to 900 troops in Somalia still. For what reason that actually anybody could justify making sense, I don't know. The actual real reason is that Trump wanted to pull troops out, and his first Secretary of Defense, the very hawkish James Mad Dog Mattis, told him, if you do that and something bad happens, I'm going to blame you for everything. And so Trump escalated there and put more troops in there. And now that it's, at the end of his administration, finally he's woken up and realized that his foreign policy, I guess, isn't anywhere near what he promised. Is talking about, troop withdrawals, and we've had more official announcements on Iraq where they're, removing 500, Afghanistan where they're going to remove 2,000. Both of those levels will now be 2,500. But also talks that some U.S. troops could be coming out of Somalia. I'm not sure what troops they're talking about, because we have soldiers and we have special forces, and so even if we remove the soldiers, I would guess we still have quite a few special forces operating in that country. Also, went completely unnoticed during the Trump administration, all the yelling and screaming about Russia Gate and that fake nonsense. Everybody ignored a lot of Trump's real crimes, including how much he escalated the war in Somalia, carrying out at least 63 airstrikes in the past year in that country, which is more than Obama or Bush ever carried out. And then when, journalists, and there's not many on the ground, they are actually able to get out to the areas where these airstrikes take place and talk to the, people and figure out what happened. Most of the time, it's people who are not threats to America, but not even threats to their local community or militants at all. They're just regular people who are blown up. You do have Al-Shabaab, and one time at least there was an Islamic State affiliate operating in Somalia, but for the most part, those people seem to be more concerned about blowing themselves up in downtown Mogadishu. I believe an ice cream parlor was hit in the past couple of days, killing 6 people. That being the capital of Mogadishu, but not international. We're coming for the U.S. and when the U.S. isn't involved in the region, like in Kenya, where there was an attack on a Kenyan base and some Americans died in that attack, there's really not an opportunity or a reason for Al-Shabaab to target the United States. But even then, that's not who ends up getting blown up in a lot of these airstrikes or drone strikes. It ends up, again, being just regular civilians. I think one time it was like an old man and a kid going to school on a little mini bus that got blown up. Another time it was a family. And, of course, all this instability leads and fuels for, groups like Al-Shabaab to rise and, get power. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show today. I just want to say, if you're listening to this on the old foreign policy focus feeds, please switch over to the conflicts of interest ones. I'm having an issue with just a couple of the podcatchers where they're I have the old feed, so they're not letting the new feed up. And so once everybody switches over to a new feed, and so if you're listening on Stitcher, if you do something else for a month or so, I appreciate it, particularly if you could watch on YouTube, because then you can share the show from there and like the show and help us build that channel, because we're trying to do some really cool things with that. Then I will get rid of the old feeds, which hopefully will let the news feeds all come up, and I'll definitely post those up almost everywhere that the news feeds are up. So subscribe to the show on the conflicts of interest feeds. Subscribe to the show on YouTube. Check out the Libertarian Institute, and I will be back with more shows this week. Thanks, everyone.